So getting straight into this, I have just spent about the last month learning Blender. I am a recent design grad and I didn't really want to go straight to the workforce. So I was like, you know what? I want to learn Blender and I want to really get into 3D and I want to do social media and I want to see how far that will take me. So that has been what I've been doing for the last month. That's been the whole plan. And yeah, I'm just going to talk a bit more about that and then go through a time lapse with a voiceover of how I made the three projects that consisted the first month in Blender. So enjoy. So then, the first part of the plan, learning Blender. So I watched a whole bunch of tutorials to get a grip on Blender. I found the Blender Fundamentals course on the Blender YouTube channel to be the most helpful resource. And then I knew that I wanted to make cuter styled things. So I watched a bunch of tutorials to do with that. So a lot of like polygon runway tutorials and stylized tutorials in Blender to kind of start building the skills that I knew that I was actually going to use in the project. Once I felt like I had a pretty solid understanding of Blender and I felt like I could probably start working on projects myself, I was like, okay, well, what is doing well in the Blender community at the moment? What are people enjoying? What are people looking at? So that then I don't make things and have like nobody look at them. So I did a bunch of social media research. I had a look at a bunch of artists that were doing really well and had a look at the style of things that they were making. And I found that cuter style things were doing really well, and especially isometric cute style things and things with quite simple shapes, which worked well because it's achievable for somebody who is just starting in Blender to make these cute, simple, like isometric sort of style things. And I also looked at the style of content that was doing well, like what style of content was doing well on platforms like TikTok and Instagram and Twitter, and what was not doing well. And I just made a bunch of notes about what people were doing right and what wasn't working. And I found that, being really active was super helpful. And I just decided that I just wanted to post and not be too particular about it and just start posting. Because, if you scroll all the way back on like people who are really successful's Instagrams, you can see that like they just posted a lot and then eventually they figured it out and were able to be successful. But it's like you have to do a lot of trial and error. So I was like, okay, I won't be too particular and I will just start posting. But doing the research did like give me an idea of what was doing well and what wasn't doing well. Like for example, I noticed that just straight up Blender tutorials on TikTok like weren't doing very well. Like I usually scroll past them because it's kind of boring to just like see somebody like do a tutorial and they're not really speaking over it. There's nothing super interesting going on apart from like, you might pick up a couple things, but the majority of people who see that video are just going to scroll straight past it. So I was like, okay, that sort of style isn't really working. But what is working is when you have a little bit more personality in it, you're talking over it, and usually shorter style videos. But I kind of threw that out the window. I tried to do more of like a storytelling kind of thing that worked here and there. But I'll get into that more later. Something that I also noticed was that fan art was probably a good place to start because then you're like increasing your reach, you're increasing the amount of people that are going to be enjoying your work. So if you just stick to making like isometrics that don't really have like a fan art sort of aesthetic to them, you're really keeping it to people who are in the Blender community. People who enjoy Blender things. But if you make it fan art, then you're like increasing it to people who enjoy like said thing. So I was really enjoying Animal Crossing at the time, and I'm also just a massive Animal Crossing fan in general. So I was like, why don't I make some like Animal Crossing isometrics as my first project, so that then I can have people in the Blender community enjoy it, and also have people who like gaming and Animal Crossing and cute things also enjoy it. So then I had pretty much everything I needed set up. I knew I wanted to make it Animal Crossing fan art, that isometrics were doing well, and the cute artwork was doing well, and that was what I wanted to pursue with this project. So then I made a plan. I decided that I wanted to make 3 isometric scenes that were Animal Crossing related, each for a different season, and have it be usable as wallpapers and also as the backgrounds for those like study background music videos, because I love those background music videos, and I wanted to make my own, and it just made sense. I was like, yeah, this seems like a project that I'm interested in, that will be useful outside of just learning Blender, and that I can also use it to learn Blender. Like, there was a lot of things that made this project make sense to me. That, yeah, one, it would help me learn Blender. Two, it was something that I could realistically achieve. Three, it was something that, quite a large amount of people would be able to find interest in. And four, it was just useful. It had a lot of applications. So I was like, okay, cool. let's do it then. The first project in the set of 3 that I wanted to make was the spring picnic render. So I decided pretty early on, with a bunch of references in my Miro board, that I wanted to make it a spring picnic, and that I wanted to model up a bunch of the assets that were already in Animal Crossing, because it gives you a really solid reference to be able to make the things. I had a sketch, I had a little list of all the things that I was going to need to model, and in the tutorials that I was watching around that time, I was making sure that they were including similar things. Like, for example, I found polygon runways, little tree isometric tutorial to be super useful. It showed you how to do things like rocks and trees, and it was just super useful. So the actual modeling, I started with the ground plane, and I did 2 of these. So I think the first one, I found that it was too, it was looking too like, not blocky enough. It wasn't looking like Animal Crossing. So I ended up ditching it and making a new one. But yeah, I had quite a few struggles with it. I just didn't really know like what I was doing, and for some reason that I don't actually remember now, I wanted the part where the water would flow to be separate. I think so that I could use that as the effector when I was doing the water simulating. But you can just use the whole ground plane. So I didn't need to do that at all. So I struggled through it for no apparent reason. And you'll also see that I do a lot of like UV mapping and drawing on it, and then taking it into Photoshop, because I was really unsure of whether or not it was going to look good. So I kept on wanting to take it towards like a more final looking thing with materials and texture, so that I could get some kind of an idea of what the final thing would look like. So then finally, with really poor topology, you can see that I did my topology really badly, and I have overlapping faces, but I just kind of go with it anyway. Once I've got a nice ground plane that I feel happy with, I started doing the water simulating, which you can go and watch the full video on if you want more details on the water simulating. So then that all went pretty smoothly, thankfully. And I went into UV mapping to, again, like with this thing of trying to get an idea of what it would look like in the final. I kept on doing that, which is why I keep UV mapping it. And then the water simulating was fine, but the texture was really difficult. Like it was at this point I was really like, oh god, is this gonna look any good? And I kept on messing with the water, and I just didn't know how to make it look right, because I was a bit confused about how the water would refract the brown color of the UV map. So I decided to make the water really blue instead, and I thought maybe that would look more stylized. But yeah, it definitely didn't work, so I kind of gave up on it and started adding more details to the scene. I'd modeled some tulips before I started the project, just as like a little test to see whether or not I knew what I was doing in Blender or not, to be able to like do my own project. And I did it, and they looked fine, so I was like, okay, I'll start my own project. So I added those. I added a rock that I learned from Polygon Runway. I added the picnic mat, and I felt like that was looking, at this point I was like, yeah, okay, it's not looking too bad. It could be better, but it could also be a lot worse, and you can still see my really bad topology right there. Okay, so then I start doing the details from the Animal Crossing like little spring hamper. So I made the orange juice, the cups, the plate, I made the food, and this was actually really fun. I was really surprised that this was actually fairly intuitive, because I didn't have any tutorials for these, so I was just kind of working it out as I went along, and it was all fine. I think the hardest thing was probably the rice. I definitely struggled to make that look realistic, but doing the pillow was really fun. I liked inflating it. I thought that it was a really fun little technique. Yeah, adding it all in together, putting it all nice in the compositing, trying to do the lighting. Yeah, the lighting here is definitely getting there. And then I just added really basic materials to start with. And I struggled a lot with that orange juice. Like, you can see there that it has this weird black line in the render, and I just couldn't figure out what was causing that issue. I don't actually remember what it was. There was some issue with something that was coming up. It must have been checked to, maybe I duplicated it or something. There was something that was coming up in the viewport that wasn't coming up in the render, and it was making this gap, and it was really annoying me. So I edited it out most of the time in Photoshop, but then I think I actually went in and tried to fix it, and I think that I did in the end. A lot of tweaking for UV mapping, trying to get the right colors for the ground plane was kind of tricky. And then I realized that in the shader nodes, they actually have like curves and brightness and contrast, which I wish I had discovered earlier, because I was doing a lot of going into Photoshop and then changing the hue, changing the curves, changing the brightness and contrast, and then taking it back into Blender, when you can just do that all in Blender. So that was something that I kind of wish I had figured out a bit earlier. And then I really wanted to work on this little part of the render, because I was a bit worried that I wouldn't be able to make the tree and make the full render look good. So I really wanted to make myself feel kind of satisfied by at least having something that looked nice from this render. So I really focused on the picnic scene and the details of that for a while, and then I tried doing the tree, and as you can see, it went really badly, and I had no idea what I was doing, and I couldn't figure it out because I didn't know very much about Blender, and I was trying to, it was just a bit of a nightmare. The trunk looks really bad at this point, but I was like, whatever, let me just try with it anyway, and as you can see, I got rid of it because it didn't work. So then I was feeling sad, so I decided, well, let's just animate this little part because that looks cute. And as long as something looks cute, that's fine. So I animated that part kind of in procrastination for doing the tree trunk and actually finishing the rest of the render. And then I post-processed it and did everything, and I was like, oh my god, look at that. It actually looks pretty cute. So that was quite a satisfying little part of the project. And then I went back to the trunk, but this time I had a tutorial from Ma that really helped me do it super fast. And then I decided that I didn't want to use petals for the spheres of the tree, so I modeled up a little flower, and that was really annoying actually. I didn't know, again, how to do it really evenly. Same problem with the trunk, but I figured it out because it was only like 5 petals, so I figured it out. Tried doing butterflies, as you can see, couldn't figure it out. Ended up just like using alpha maps and getting a little picture of a butterfly and using that, and then adding those. And yeah, the final edits were also really important, so adding the cloud, making things deeper was a really important edit actually for this render. Again, you can still see my poor topology. Through the whole thing, you can see the bad topology. It still annoys me, like that the faces are overlapping. But the final details really did help, and I got a lot of help for that from the internet and just asking people about what they thought I could improve. and that was really, really helpful. It really helped the render get to a place where I felt like the whole thing was nice. Yeah, so that's the final render for that one, and it turned out a lot better than I was expecting. I was really worried that I was going to hate it. Like, definitely at the start of the project, with the water and everything, I was messaging my friends being like, oh my god, this looks terrible. What am I going to do? But in the end, yeah, it all turned out well, which was really surprising and really satisfying, especially for a first project in a new program. It's really nice, and it gives you a lot of motivation when you have something that you feel happy with. And then my second project I worked on within this bigger project was the Animal Crossing Rainy Day render. And I think this one was the most technically challenging. Like, I definitely really started to figure out Blender in this project. Like, as you can see here, I spent the start of the project trying to, again, do the landforming, and I found this one... I feel like this was actually one of the more difficult parts of the project, was trying to make the topology right. But I was able to get it in the end through like doing like using the loop tool to fill in some of those spaces that occurred when I cut the cube in half so that I could do the water. And then I didn't have to do that to the water because, you know, like, it's water, so it doesn't need that other side. So that was fine. And then because I'd worked on the last project, making these smaller things was a lot easier this time. So on the first day, I decided that I wanted to model up some little karopi snacks because I thought that it would look really cute to have kind of something cute to show for the first day on TikTok, because I was doing those daily update TikToks, and I was like, oh yeah, this will probably, you know, get people's attention. Yeah, so I did the little karapis. I started to add a couple of little details, but yeah, it's pretty basic on the first day. Adding some just very basic materials to, again, kind of make sure that I had the right idea of what was going on. But something you'll notice throughout like the start of the project is that I had it from the wrong angle. So it looks really weird for a while because I had the main isometric camera at a really weird angle. Yeah, so I'm making up the little scene that I wanted to post on TikTok, and I think I also posted it on Twitter and stuff, just with the little karopi snack, and that was pretty cute. I thought it was a pretty fun little start. The water was definitely one of the most difficult parts of this project. Making still water wasn't really much of an issue. Like, even at this part of the project, it looks fine, but it was really animating it that was super difficult. But I get into that more later. Something I also found really hard was making plants. I really hated making plants. So I actually gave up on that plant and I never finished it. I just got rid of it because I was too frustrated. So this is how I made the water ripple. I used the wave, like modifying the dynamic, what's it called? The dynamic paint or something like that. And use the wave for that. And it was such a nightmare. Like, I go over this over and over again. If you pay attention to this time lapse, like, there is so much of me going back to these ripples and trying to make them work, and I kept giving up on them. Like, in my TikTok series, I say, like, I've given up. Like, I can't make a ripple. Sorry, guys. I was like, this isn't happening. And I tried it over and over again, like, yeah, where you get your particle systems, you make it fall, that is like the paint, and then when it hits the other object, it makes waves. Yeah, it just kept on. I just couldn't figure it out. It was also quite glitchy, which I think was one of the main issues that made me super confused when I was doing these animations over and over again of the water. Was I think that it wasn't actually rendering out properly. I'm not sure why that happened, whether it was my fault or Blender's fault. But yeah, it was something I noticed once I started getting more comfortable with that simulation. Was I realized that it wasn't coming out the same every time, and that I was missing frames and things like that, which you'll see more of later. So I just kept on giving up on it. As for the textures, that was also something that I really struggled with. As you can see in Photoshop, I did most of it in Photoshop, which is something that I don't think was a good idea. I think I wasted a lot of time actually doing things in Photoshop, because that was the technique I was used to doing in 3ds Max, was doing all of my UV mapping with Photoshop. But I feel like in Blender, you should really try and utilize the not the geometry nodes, the shader nodes. It just makes life so much easier being able to make textures within Blender. And I really wish that that was something I'd learned a little bit earlier. So I just splodge on colors at this part of the project. I either use realistic textures, like for the wood, or I splodge colors on and hope that it looks okay, which most of the time it does. The splodging color technique actually kind of did work okay. At this point, I was starting to feel like it was really empty and that it was really missing something. So I went in and decided on a narrative, which I think really pushed the project further and made it a lot better. So I decided to make it like a little narrative of some guys who are gardening, and then they take a little break by the river on a rainy day. So I modeled up a water can, and that was pretty smooth. I was feeling pretty comfortable modeling by this point. Modeled up a shovel, which was a little bit more tricky, just getting the details right and making it look nice and look like a realistic Animal Crossing shovel was a little bit more tricky. I imported some stuff from my old one, like the orange juice. And then at this point, I realized that my angle was totally off, and I lined it up next to my spring picnic render, and I was like, oh my god, I've gotten this totally wrong. So that was a little bit sad that I'd been doing it wrong the whole time. But once I figured it out, I was like, whoa, hey, this actually is looking a lot better now, because I was feeling pretty worried at this point. Then I decided to add clouds, which was something that I'd wanted to do, but I kind of forgot about. So I used meta balls to make a whole stack of clouds. And at this point, they just have a volume shader on them, so they look a little bit weird, but they come together in the end. And they were definitely a really good addition. I actually really like the meta ball clouds. I feel like they really were nice for the scene. But I shouldn't have put them in the water. It looked really weird. I ended up getting rid of it. And then I go back to textures. I come back to this wood texture a lot because it looked really bad. And this issue really annoyed me. There was that little pause there because I went and posted it on Reddit. And I was like, why is that doing that? Like, the UV map looks different. How come it's making that top bit like go on the sides when that's not what it says on the UV map? And people helped me out and said that it was because of my subdivision surface, and that if I added another loop cut that it would fix it up. So I did that and it fixed it. So thank you, Reddit, again. This texture looks terrible. I really should have just gone with stylized way earlier. It's so sad. I spent so much time in Photoshop trying to make these terrible looking textures. I ditched it and I went and did the moss texture, which worked a lot better without doing it stylized. And it's also in the background. So it's like the stakes are much lower, but the wood is really like front and center. So I wanted to make sure the wood was good. And at this point, the wood was not looking good, but that was okay. Oh, the leaf. I also struggled a lot. I know this is like a little bit late, but I really struggled making the leaf. The shape was really hard to get right. It was much easier in the spring picnic one because they were all like circle shaped. But getting the right shape for the leaves was actually pretty difficult. And I ended up just like tracing an Animal Crossing picture of it and just making a really wonky one. But it actually like looks fine considering I did it like super, super wonkily. It turned out, the thing with the leaves is that they're clipping through each other, which still annoys me a little bit, but I couldn't figure out how to fix it without, like going in manually and moving like 1,000 leaves. So I was like, I'm not doing that. So I just dealt with I just put up with the clipping leaves. And then I try again to do the water, and I think again I give up. And then I zoom in on this, and I'm like, oh, this is terrible. And someone on TikTok had mentioned to me that I should try stylized textures, and that I should search up how to do stylized textures. Thank you to that person. Saved my life. Because then finally I go in with stylized textures on the wood, and it looks miles better. Like miles and miles better. Such an improvement. I struggled so hard with those textures when it was such a simple fix. I'm going to try fixing the clouds. Way too blue here. Way too blue. What was I thinking? Make them that blue. And then here I also realized, hold on a second. The metal balls look really weird going through the water. So I tried to stop them going to the water, but I couldn't make it work. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to delete them. So I deleted them, and they looked fine. So, great. Oh, yeah, lighting. I haven't covered the lighting very much, but I cover the lighting a lot in the second, the final piece, the autumn render. The main focus was on the lighting. So, yeah. And then I prepared and I post-processed that render because I was like, it's almost done. So I wanted to get feedback on it. So I rendered out, post-processed it in Photoshop. And this one really looks way nicer in Photoshop. Like, being able to turn up the curves on all of this was really important. And it just made it really like pop. So I did that. And then I posted it to Reddit. And then I don't think I actually posted the detail shots anywhere. Actually, I posted it to Reddit. And then I got a whole bunch of feedback. And like you can see there, I wrote down all the feedback and I was like, alrighty, I'm going to take it to the final. So I added oranges, which is a really nice little addition. You can see me modeling that here, but I feel like I modeled it. The modeling definitely is a little bit wacky, but it looked fine. I mean, they're small you can't really see them that well, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, they turned out good. Oh, I'm making the background blue. That was a really great change. Thank you again to whoever suggested that, because that was a great change. Oh yeah, I tried doing it fully isometric because, like if you're familiar with proper isometric, this isn't a proper isometric. None of these are proper isometrics. They're kind of like fake isometrics. So I tried putting it in the proper isometric view, and I was like, yeah, it's okay. But I was like, nah, I'll keep it consistent with the other one. Oh yeah, and then I fully committed to doing the raindrops, and this is where I realized that it was glitchy, and this was such a pain. Like, frames were missing from the animation, so like I would render out the whole animation, and then I'd pop it all in After Effects, and then there would be frames missing. So I'd play it and I'd be like, oh my god, this looks so weird. And then eventually I realized, I was like, oh my god, there's frames literally missing from this. So I had to go in manually and like delete the like frames where there was nothing in it. Like the animation would just go back to frame 1. So annoying. And then I decided, well, since I'm going to fully commit to the water, like, why don't I just, like, fully commit to this animation? So I decided to also do wet maps, which was something that I learned from one of the rain tutorials, I think by one of those, like, Blender CG people. And it actually worked, which I was really surprised. I was like, I don't think this is going to work. But it did! And it wasn't actually too tricky to get working either. So that was super satisfying, having the wet maps work. And then that brings us through to the final render. This one was technically really hard. A lot of struggles with the raindrops and with the water. That bit was really hard, and just like the glitchiness was really annoying. But it all turned out really well in the end, thankfully. I feel really, really satisfied with this one. I think this one, I feel pretty good about it. And the final render, the autumn evening. I think that this one was the hardest conceptually and also just like mentally in general. I feel like I had a lot of roadblocks and I was starting to feel a little bit burnt out. I think that the amount that I was working and the kind of hours I was doing was just like a little bit silly, and I think I was pushing myself a little bit too hard between making a whole bunch of renders and then also uploading on TikTok and doing all the social media stuff. I think I was pushing it a little bit and it was just draining me a bit. And that was something that I found a bit tricky with this render, was that I was starting to kind of lose motivation to do it, especially in this early stage. I just also felt like I didn't really have a vision, which was where it was tricky conceptually. I feel like with my two other ones, I really had a vision before I started in my head of what I kind of wanted the final outcome to look like. But with this one, when I started, I didn't really have that. I had like a very vague idea, but I couldn't really visualize the final, which was difficult. So at this stage, I struggled again with the topology, and every single time I struggled with the topology of the ground. And at this stage, it's still pretty weird. The way that I made it was really janky and just not quite working, so I ended up going back and using some like really janky method to make the river and make sure that everything was looking okay. But yeah, I spent a lot of time just looking at my screen being like, how do I do this? Yeah, this bit right here was where I really struggled. I just didn't really know whether or not I should fill in all of those holes. I ended up not doing that, but yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to fill in those holes and make it be editable. But then I ended up splitting them into two and then extruding the sides into each other, and like the bottom bits into each other, and it fit perfectly, and it was way easier, and that meant that the topology was great and it was really easy to edit. So that went fine in the end after a fair bit of struggling. Then I make this like woven basket for the oranges. I just googled how to make a woven basket on YouTube. I searched on YouTube how to do it, and there were a couple good tutorials that were pretty helpful, but I didn't spend too much time on it because I didn't feel it was in the background, so I didn't make it super perfect. Just modeling up the small things for the picnic. Yeah, at this point, yeah, I still wasn't really feeling good about it, but modeling, I mean, doing the UV mapping, and I made it way too orange at the start. So I had to change that up a fair bit. And I kind of wish that I made the orange, what are they called? The little bag, the autumn bag, the maple leaf bag. I wish that I had made this a little bit more front and center because I think it's so cute. Yeah, I did have a couple of issues with it though. Just making it, yeah, like you can see right there, the UV mapping is all wrong because of the subdivision surface. But I fixed it, and I feel like it was super cute. But yeah, I feel like maybe I should have done a close-up of it because it turned out cute. The mushrooms, I think, were my favorite part of this render. It was super fun figuring it out, and I feel like they were just really sweet. And it was, at this point, I was kind of like, oh, okay, you know what, actually I have a bit of an idea for this. It's like, maybe I can really focus on the lighting and make it a nighttime scene instead of a day scene, and then really focus on atmosphere. So that brought me a lot more motivation, where I was like, okay, I have an idea now that I feel excited about, because before I just didn't really feel excited. I was kind of like, oh god, I just want this project to be over. But once I started adding the mushrooms, I was like, oh, this is a lot more fun now. Yeah. The lighting became really important, and I struggled with it. It took me quite a while to get to a render that was looking okay. Like, I was feeling that it was looking okay here, but I wasn't feeling particularly good about it. But it definitely improves a lot towards the end. Yeah, I think that the colors were just way too warm, just looking a little bit weird. The pumpkins, again, I just searched this on YouTube, how to make pumpkins, watched a tutorial, did it, edited it to make it look like what I wanted. And the dirt was also a bit of a struggle. Yeah, the dirt doesn't look good here, but I figure it out again. I figure it out later on. More little mushrooms. Yeah, the purple is not working. Yeah. So again, I render it all out and then put it in After Effects and have a look at the animation. And I was like, yeah, it's looking okay. I was kind of interested by it like getting darker, but I think that I made it way too dark. That was something that was definitely an issue up until almost the very end. Having everything look too dark because I really wanted the lights to pop in the scene, but then everything else was really dark, and because I was focusing so much on the lights, I think that I kind of didn't realize that other parts of the scene were really dark. Like even in this render here, you can see that that part of the tree, like between the two balls of the tree, is really dark, and I was just like, whatever, I still think it looks fine. Yeah. And then I uploaded it and I got some feedback, and I think I took a day off as well to just ponder because I felt like it wasn't looking as good as I wanted it to look. So I wanted to ponder it a bit. So then I changed the background to blue, and that already made me feel a lot better. I just felt like the scene was a little bit empty, but I think that that ended up mostly just being an issue with lighting, that the lighting just wasn't really looking good, and that was making me feel like the scene wasn't there, and I wasn't really sure why I was feeling like it wasn't there. But then, yeah, once I edited the lighting, I was feeling a lot better about it, and I was like, hey, I feel like I didn't actually need to add any more assets. It was just the lighting that was weird. Also, just adding details to the bridge. That was a fun little technique, adding those. I was a bit worried about it, about making those ropes around the bridge, but I just used, I like snapped it onto the faces. I snapped vertexes onto the nearest face, and then I just kept on extruding them to make sure that they'd stay on the wood. And yeah, it worked really well. It was a very janky technique, but it worked quite well. And just editing it was also pretty easy. Changing the UV maps for the mushrooms was a really good change, because I feel like sometimes I will make UV maps and then they look fine, so I just leave it, even though it was like a test UV map, and I'll be like, yeah, it looks fine, so I'll just leave it for the rest of the project. But I decided that I wanted to give it a go by changing it from what I had for the test, and it was really a good change. I feel like it's probably my favorite change that I made in the whole project, was changing the UV maps of the mushrooms. And these are starting to look a lot cuter here, especially once it was post-processed. This is fairly close to the final. I had a bit of a non-linear progress here, where I had that render and I feel like it actually looks pretty decent, but I didn't fully like it. So then I took it in a really different direction in post-processing and made it a lot more vibrant. And then I ended up taking it back and making it softer again. And I really like the softer outcome. Going back to the dirt, I wanted to make it, the edges of the dirt were really difficult. I came back to that quite a lot, and I found the best way to do it was to just keep it jagged, but then also add in a bunch of these like little dirt splodges to the edges and just around it in general. Just made it feel a lot more natural. So that worked pretty well. Here I take this render, and then I think I posted it and I was like, hey, give me some feedback please. And yeah, it was looking okay. And I got a lot of feedback that was very helpful, because yeah, I was a little bit lost on how to improve it, but all of the comments about lighting were again really, really helpful. So I tried a couple of different things here. I tried adding this like starry background, and it did actually look pretty cool, but I was like, ooh, I don't think that I want to do that, because I felt like it wasn't high enough quality, and also I wanted to keep it consistent with the plainer background of my other two renders. So So I decided to just keep with the plain background in the end. And here I did a lot of work on lighting, because the main things that people were coming up with was that the water was way too dark and that the scene was just too dark in general. So I added in a couple lights. I added lights into the river, like just straight up. I just added some area lights into the water. And then I also added a point light towards the middle of the scene and just made it really not very bright, so it would just brighten up some of the really dark shadows that were happening. And then I also added a rim light, so I got an area light and put it right behind the scene, which makes those like nice bright bits on the edges of the scene. I feel like that was also really important, and it just really helped to make the scene pop and just feel a little bit less flat. So this is where I took it in this very saturated kind of purple direction, which I felt looked pretty good next to the other two renders, but by itself I wasn't entirely satisfied with it. I felt like it looked fine, but it just wasn't quite what I wanted, and I kind of knew that. But I did get there in the end. Adding the fireflies with the animation was an interesting experience, because at first I just had firefly, like for the still version you don't need to animate them because it's still. So I just used little spheres, but I didn't want to animate them all by hand, so I used geometry nodes to animate them, just using a YouTube tutorial again, and that worked really well, and great technique to make the fireflies move just a little bit. I also did, I kind of got to the final product on accident. So when I was editing in After Effects, I accidentally overlaid one of the, when I was masking it, I realized that it was making the blue color in the background on lighten made the rest of the scene look really nice. It gave it this very light kind of blue glowy feeling, and I was like, that looks so pretty. So then I ended up just doing that. I just made another solid color of that background color and then put it on lighten and put it over the whole scene, and it worked really well. And then that was how I got to the final, was almost by accident. But yeah, I feel really happy with it. Again, I was really worried that it wasn't going to turn out good, and I feel like, I had a lot of struggles with this one conceptually. But in the end, by kind of a bit of luck, it turned out pretty well. The final thing that I want to talk about is how I went with the social media, because as much as I was spending a lot of time modeling in Blender, I was also probably spending about an equal amount of time making content for TikTok, Shorts, Reels, the whole shebang, replying to comments, and also trying to make YouTube videos towards the end. I spent a lot of time doing social media. Yeah, I'd say probably an equal amount to as much as I spent modeling. So that's also something that I want to talk about a little bit. So on TikTok, I did these daily videos where I would show the progress that I was making on each render, and all three of them went for about a week. So I would do about 7 or 8 days for each of them, and it went pretty well. The Spring Picnic one did the best, just because the day 7 one went mildly viral, which was a miracle. I still don't really know why, but at the moment it's sitting about 200,000 views and 40,000 likes. I'm just I didn't see that one coming, but that was really nice, and that really helped get a bunch of followers and a lot of reach, so that was really nice. And then the second one also did fairly well on TikTok. I think most of the 7 days is sitting at about 5,000 views. And then I think the day 7 got to maybe 10K. And then one of the little montages of the final project got to 40,000 views, which was all really great. But then the autumn one didn't do very well at all. My views just tanked. I was like, what? So that was kind of strange. I still don't really know why. I don't know why that one video really got pushed and then a lot of the other ones really didn't do as well. I don't know how that works. But I found TikTok to be a great platform, because then what was really great was a company saw the spring picnic render, and they reached out to me and they asked me if I would work with them on a commission. And I was like, yeah, of course, of course. That was part of my plan, was somewhere down the line to have that sort of stuff happen. So I felt so fortunate to have that happen in the first month, to be able to pick up a commission. So this is what I made. I made a little, I reworked the spring picnic render to be like a tea render, because it's a tea company, also look, it's like this Korean tea brand. They wanted my TikTok to promote their cherry blossom tea. So I did that, and they were super great to work with. It was a lot of fun. And yeah, I made a bit of money in the first month, which was super, super exciting. But I'm a little bit worried that maybe I've used up all my luck on my first project. So hopefully I can continue to have some kind of success with social media. But yeah, surprisingly, just mostly with that one video going pretty viral, and then a couple of the other ones doing fairly well. And then on Reels, I did okay. Like a couple ones here and there did okay on Reels, but I found that people were so much more interactive on TikTok. Like, I was just getting a lot more views and just a lot more reward for the content that I was creating on TikTok, rather than the content that I was creating on Reels and even Shorts. Like, Shorts was the weirdest one. Shorts makes no sense to me. Shorts was definitely the weirdest one. Like, I think I had one video get to like 3,000 views, and it just randomly out of nowhere, like the analytics look so weird. Like, it was at 0 for a few days. All of a sudden it shot up to 3K, and then it just stopped there. And I found that with Shorts all the time, that it would just randomly pick a video and just like push it out and then just drop it. I was like, this is weird. Yeah, so that's how it's been going with the social media. TikTok has definitely been the best platform. But yeah, it's been going okay. I'm up to about like 4,000 followers on TikTok. I've gained like a couple hundred on Instagram. But my account's on like 1,000 followers, because I used an old account that already had followers. Yeah, so that looks, it's an inflated number. Oops. And then yeah, about, I don't know, like 150 subscribers on YouTube, which is like pretty good for a month. I'm like, yeah, okay, like that's pretty decent. Yeah, so that's all of it. Thank you for watching. I'm pretty surprised if you stuck all the way through this long video, but thank you for watching, thank you for being here, and I'll see you soon.